You look throughout the Word of God, research it, check me out, and you'll find it to be true. Because the people of God had a habit of experiencing the goodness of God and revival and experiencing God's favor and peace. And God would bless them and they'd rejoice and they'd sing and tell about the glories of God. And then they would soon forget and they'd start establishing idols. And then when God wasn't performing the way they wanted God to perform, then they would establish other gods and they would go to the high places and they would create images and statues and idols that they could call to. And any time God would promise revival, and before His glory would settle, they would have to go to the high places, and they would have to tear down the idols, they would have to eliminate the idols from their homes, and they would have to be utterly destroyed and demolished and burnt, and then God's glory would come down again, settle amongst His people, and the people would not just have a feel-good, not just have a revival, but they would experience the very revealed essence and nature of God. That is God's design. That is how God desires to relate to His people, is in a personal way to where you would literally experience Him revealed. But that can't happen when there's idols. And in the church today, we sang about it, the church today is sick. And it's easy to point fingers and point blame, but we need to look inward and we need to look at ourselves, because I'm here to tell you, I see it happening. I see the glory of God coming and resting in this place. I see a time when I can't preach. I see a time coming when no one cares about what time it is or what's on TV later or what's going on in their lives. I see a time when people refuse to leave the building because of the presence of God. Amen. I see a time when people will come, and I don't know why I'm here, but I've been drawn here, and demons are cast out. People are healed. People are made whole. People find wholeness. People that are in bondage, people that are contemplating suicide, they'll come here because of the draw of the glory of God. And that will only happen when you and I facilitate that. And it only happens when we eliminate the idols from our lives. And instead of pointing fingers at everybody else, that we look in our life and say, what do I have in my life that I love, like, or desire more than I love, like, or desire Him? And we begin to destroy those things out of our life and make Him our one and only passion. Then the glory of God will settle in this place in a way that you and I have never ever seen or experienced, and we cannot explain. You won't be able to tell people about it. You won't be able to explain it. You'll just have to tell them. You're just going to have to come experience it, because I can't explain it.
Glory. Glory.
Amen? That is what I long for. I'm tired of church. I love my church. I love you. I love preaching and presenting the Word. I love worshiping, but I'm tired of having church. I'm tired of going to church. I want to experience God in a way that will change me forever. I don't care if it exposes me. I don't care if it embarrasses me. I don't care if it requires something of me. I want the glory of God to invade my life and undo me and ruin me until there's nothing left but hardcore passion for Him and His Word. Amen. That is what God wants to do in this church. We're in the last days, and this is going to be a place of healing. This is going to be a place where people come, and they'll not all stay. Some will come and receive healing of their brokenness and be made whole and be restored and go back to other churches, and that's okay. But some people are going to come, and they're going to find hope, and they're going to find healing. That's not my message today. But I want to encourage you, and I want to speak to you today about the glory of God, because we can keep calling for it, we can keep crying for it, but until we mean it, we won't experience it. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Turning your Bibles with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 3. This message today developed out of a Bible study that we did a few weeks ago.
Praise God.
And we were studying God revealed, how God reveals Himself. And I encourage you to, if you can, I know some of you at work, you're out of town, you can't be here, it's impossible, and that's okay. But I encourage you, if you can, start being here on Wednesday nights, because we're getting into some stuff that I promise you will bless you and take you deeper. Sunday morning is just a part of what we do. And what we do outside of Sunday morning is so much more significant than what we do here on Sunday morning. This is about coming together and expressing our love and devotion and singing to a God together and proclaiming His goodness together and discussing His Word. On Wednesday night, we're getting deeper, and everyone has discussion, and we discuss the Word of God and we go deeper. This message today is a result of studying Exodus chapters 3 and 4. And we're going to, so today, the title of my message is A Divine Setup. A divine setup. Divine meaning from God. Supernatural. Inhuman. Divine. A divine setup. And we're going to see, and we're going to look at how many times things that happen in your life and mine is a divine setup. It's not happenstance, it's not circumstance, it's a divine setup. And we need to learn to view the things that happen in our life in the perspective of seeing through the lens of God, seeing our lives through the lens of destiny and purpose. And like we talked about a couple weeks ago in the message the Eternity wrote, having an eternal perspective, not living in the moment and basing everything I do, everything I believe, every decision I make on the here and now, but no, how does this affect my eternity? And when you begin to have that eternal perspective, you begin to look at your life different. And you begin to consider your purpose. And then you begin to understand that there's things that happen in your life, even difficult times, even bad things, that will happen in your life, that if you learn to get a perspective on it and not just react to those things, but to have God's perspective on it, you'll find out that God is divinely setting you up.
Amen.
And has divinely set you up.
Amen.
And so let's look at Exodus today. We are going to start in chapter 3. And we are going to read verses 1 through 10. So, Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it reads like this. And I'm in Genesis, that's not going to help. Okay, Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now we're going to keep reading in just a moment, but that first verse has so much in it. I shared with the Bible study group, I read this multiple times. And it never hit me like it did when we began to study this, and I began to prepare the Bible study. Because just reading this on the surface, it just tells you what was going on with Moses. It's just a nice story about what was happening in Moses' life. But there's so much detail there that is so specific, and God is so specific in what He does and how He works in our life. And we're going to get into that in just a minute.
Praise God.
But in verse 2, and the angel of the Lord, and let me just take a short side note here to tell you that if you study that in context, that literally meant the presence of the Lord Himself. And scholars and a lot of theologians believe that that was Jesus Christ in His presence in the flesh that came and appeared and spoke to Moses. But when we read this and when you understand that when it says an angel of the Lord, it literally meant and the presence of the Lord, meaning the person of the Lord is what it was saying there. So this just wasn't Michael or Gabriel, right? This was the Lord Himself appearing. And He said, He appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush doesn't burn. Moses had been in the desert. It was not uncommon, even to this day, in certain parts of the desert places in the Mideast and Israel, for bushes just to spontaneously combust. It was likely not uncommon for Moses to see a bush on fire. But what caught his attention was that the bush wasn't consumed. And can I tell you that when the fire of God comes in your life, when the presence of the Lord is so incredibly manifested in your life that it comes as a fire, and the fire of the presence of God begins to consume or begins to invade your life, it won't consume you. It's not a violent thing. It's not a hurtful thing. What it does is it's a manifestation of the presence of God. The Holy Spirit that manifested on the day of Pentecost in the book of Acts, manifested as flames of fire. The Holy Spirit is many times talked about and manifested as fire. There is a tangible presence of God that you and I can experience that is so intense, so incredible, that it literally feels like a fire. It feels like you are engulfed in flames. I'm here to tell you, I've experienced it, and that's the best way I can describe it, but I'm telling you, I'm not doing any justice. I understood one time, in a time of prayer, and I was at the church, and I was praying, and I decided I'm just going to stay all night. I'm going to seek and I'm going to intercede. And I'm not going to let go until I touch Him. I'm not going to let go until I experience Him in a way that's obvious. I'm not going to leave this place until God manifests Himself in my life and everything changes. And I was seeking God. And then I was interceding and I was worshiping. And then I understood suddenly what Jeremiah said when he said it's like a fire shut up in my bones. Because it literally felt like there was this intense inferno, like a volcano was erupting inside of me, and the tangible presence of God came in my life, and I fell flat on my face, and for hours I couldn't move because of the presence of God. And in that moment, as much fear of the Lord as I had, when I say fear, I'm not talking about being scared, because I was overwhelmed and joyful about it. But I was fearful because suddenly I was like Isaiah, woe is me! In this credible presence of God, and I fall on my face and I'm thinking, how in the world, what did I do by asking for this? What was I thinking? Because I'm unclean and I'm sinful and I've got issues in my life, yet the presence of God came down and invaded me and He responded. Why? Because I was so wonderful? No. Because I was hungry. And nothing else in my life mattered. I didn't care what was going on in my life. I was going to be in the presence of God, and I was going to seek Him, and I was going to experience Him. All I wanted was Him. And in that moment, as I laid there on my face, I couldn't move, and I thought, I'm never leaving. I'm never leaving. They can have church, prayer meetings tomorrow night. They can pray, but I'm not moving from this spot. It literally felt like the weight of the earth was on me, and there was this weight, and there was this glory, and this manifestation in the presence of God, and He began to speak life into me, and He began to reveal things to me, and something changed. In that moment, from that moment to now, I was never, ever the same. Ever. That changed me forever. I was struggling with sin. I had issues in my life. I was struggling to live out my faith in school. I was a high schooler. I was struggling with a lot of things, and from that moment on, I thought, nothing is going to stop me. There was a fire that took over my life, and I was consumed by it. In verse 3, then Moses said, I will now turn and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw, someone say, when the Lord saw.
When the Lord saw.
When the Lord saw that he turned aside and God called to him from the midst of the bush and said to him, Moses! I know it says Moses, Moses, but in Hebrew writing, a loud pronunciation, a shout was indicated, not like we do today with all caps, but with a repeated, whatever was being shouted would be written twice. Called out from the midst of the bush and said, Moses! And he said, here I am. Notice what got God's attention. That Moses was there. Moses was there. Moses was present. Did the fact that Moses happened to be there get God's attention? Was that when God turned aside and called to Moses? Was that when Moses heard the audible voice of God because he showed up? No, he turned aside. He was herding sheep. There was who knows how many hundreds? Who knows how many sheep that he was herding? There was predators. He had to keep a watchful eye, but he turned aside from everything that mattered to him, everything that meant something to him. He turned aside, and God saw it.
Amen.
I'm here to tell you this morning, when you turn aside, you will get God's attention, and God will speak into your life. That's when God spoke to him. Here I am. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. And in that time period, in ancient Hebrew culture, the ultimate sign of respect and honor for someone that you were honoring, recognizing their stature, recognizing their presence, recognizing their greatness, is you would remove your shoes. Not just when you went in their home. That's still a custom in Israel. To show respect to someone's home, you remove your shoes. But anytime you were in the presence of greatness, you would remove your shoes. That would be like the President of the United States walking in this building right now. Whether you're a fan of the current president or not, the fact that he's the president, or the local senator, or the governor of Iowa walking in here right now, to recognize their stature, to honor their position, we would take off our shoes and honor them. That's what was happening here. That was what happened in this time and culture. So God tells him, Moses, don't approach me. You can't approach me like you are. In order to approach the manifestation of my presence, in order to come near what is happening here, you have got to show honor. You have got to show yourself as less than. Right? John understood this. John the Baptist, when he said, I must decrease and he must increase. That's the very nature of someone who recognized the glory of God. That we don't just arbitrarily just enter in. We don't take it for granted. We don't take for granted that we can just go through the outer courts and into the holy place just because we're there, just because we bear his name. No, we wouldn't dare. No one would enter into the holy place because they know that in the holy place you get killed. Only the priest can go. But Jesus cut down the wall of separation between God and man. And we have direct access to God, but you don't approach the tangible, manifested presence of God without honoring and showing reverence for him. You take off your shoes. You show honor. You and I, so much in the church today, we're showing up on Sunday morning thinking we're doing our good Christian duty. We say our little morning prayers. We do our little devotion, and we think that we're Christians. We think we're doing everything right because we're showed up, because we're doing all the right things. No, it's time that you and I begin to take off our shoes and reverence the manifested glory of God.
Amen.
Verse 6. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Where's the fear of God in the church today? Where's the fear of God in my life and yours? He hid his face because he was afraid to look upon God. He had heard about God up to this point. Moses had no personal encounter with God. He was raised in Pharaoh's house, as we'll talk about in just a minute. He ran from his life because Pharaoh's son wanted to kill him. Spent 40 years on the run, and now here he is. He'd heard about God. His mother had taught him about God. He'd heard about the one and only true God of Israel. And now here he is, knowing who this God is. Knowing about his omnipotence, his power, his authority, his divine sovereignty over all of heaven and all of earth. And now he has a personal confrontation with him, and he hides his face out of fear, out of reverence for God. I cannot look upon his holiness. Where is the fear of God in the church today? Where is the fear of God in the life of a believer today? We don't reverence God. We show up and we get a little something, we feel good, and that was a good service. But we don't experience the shaking that took place in the book of Acts when the building shook at the presence of God. We don't experience that anymore. We don't experience the glory of God that comes down and people fall flat on their face in reverence and fear and awe of God. We don't experience it because we don't reverence Him. We don't reverence Him in His presence. We don't fear Him anymore. It's time that the fear of God return to our lives.
Amen.
So I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now, therefore, behold, because of everything I just said, pay attention, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. And I've also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. I did not plan this next part. It was not part of my message. But I'm here to tell you, God has not turned a deaf ear to the cry of His people. This world has gotten darker. And the responsibility for that is on the church, because the light of the church has grown dim. That's on us. We've not reflected His glory, and His light is not shining through us, and the world is getting darker. But darkness is exposed by light. And the remnant of God in these last days is beginning to rise up. People who are steadfast. People who are passionate about Christ. People whose only purpose in life is to know Him and make Him known. And their cry is, come before the throne of a holy God. And I'm here to tell you that the exposure that we've seen in Hollywood and the disgusting things that have happened is just the surface. I'm here to tell you this morning that more darkness is about to be revealed. God has heard the cry of His people. And He's getting ready to respond. He's just looking for someone to say, here I am, send me. He's looking for someone that'll be passionate. He's looking for someone that'll give complete obedience. And God is going to use a remnant people in these last days to spring up revival fires all over this country. And America is not doomed. We're in a very, very bad place. But there's a remnant of believers who have not bowed their knee to the system of this world. And God is about to call on them. If that's you, God is about to call on you to intercede, to come before the throne and the face of God. And instead of criticizing, instead of judging, instead of posting on Facebook, you're going to come before the throne of God. And you're going to have conversations with God about what you're seeing in the world. And God is about to answer those cries of intercession. And He's going to expose more darkness with the light of true Christianity, with the light of His truly presented and preached word. And that deal that you saw with that Hollywood director is just the start of what is about to be exposed in entertainment and politics in this country. Mark it down that I said it, record it, take notes, it's about to happen. God hears the cry of His people. We need to understand that today. The people of God have been enslaved for hundreds of years, and God calls out Moses and said, I've heard their cry, and I've come down to answer them. Therefore, go, I'm going to send you.
Come on.
God's just looking for someone to say, here I am. God called to Moses. He turned aside and said, here I am. God's looking for an Isaiah to say, here I am, send me. I'll go. Here's what we need to understand. We often misunderstand the happenings in our life, and we don't understand the significance of the things that take place in our life, whether positive or negative. And we fail to see the hand of God at work in our lives, and that's what sometimes we don't walk in the fullness of the purpose of God in our lives, because we're sitting here complaining and whining and moaning and about all these things that happen in our life, and we're setting plans and we're thinking of how we want our life to go, and when our life doesn't go that way, we become discouraged and despondent, and we question God, and we get weak, and we instead of running to God and pursuing God for answers, and God, speak to me and show me your ways, We withdraw from God, and we begin to question our lives, and why is this happening to me? Can I tell you this morning? God, it's been said that God works in mysterious ways. But can I tell you this morning? God does not work in mysterious ways. Because He wants to reveal Himself to His people. God is not mysterious. God is revealed. He works in specific ways. God does not work in mysterious ways. He works in specific ways. So the backstory to what's going on here with Moses is that Moses was a discarded baby. The people of Israel were beginning to flourish in the land of Egypt, and the Egyptians were afraid that they were going to become too numerous and powerful, and that they were going to take over the land of Egypt and wipe out the Egyptians and make everything their own. So they came up with a plan that the only way to stop this from happening was they've got to start killing them out. And they were going to start with the firstborn of every family. They were going to wipe out the strength. They were going to wipe out the future generations. So an order went forth from Pharaoh, kill every firstborn. Kill all the firstborn males. Wipe them out. And then not only will that keep them from growing and flourishing, that will discourage them, and they'll either leave Egypt, or they'll be so weak and defeated from what we've done that they won't be an issue for us. So the order went out. Moses was on the list to be killed. But Moses' mother discarded him. You know the story. So Moses was just a discarded baby who just happened to be discovered by Pharaoh's daughter and just happened to be brought in and raised in Pharaoh's palace. Moses' mother just happened to be chosen to be his caregiver and help raise him. He just happened to be raised to know all of Egypt's customs and ways, the strength of their military and the weakness of their belief in false gods. All this, all the while, it just so happened that his mother would have taught him about Hebrew history and told him about the one true God of his fathers. Now here's Moses in the text that we're reading today. Many years later, having had his life turned upside down, he enjoyed the glories and the esteem and the, what's the word I'm looking for? The exquisiteness of the palace of Egypt. He was like a son to Pharaoh. He was a son to Pharaoh's daughter, and he was like a grandson to Pharaoh. He was important. He had stature. He dressed in the royal garments of Egypt. He had everything that at his disposal that Egypt had. But now, Pharaoh's other son wants to kill him. He wants him dead. And he's going to take power. So Moses flees and he's on the run for his life, and suddenly he's in the middle of nowhere. He's in a desert. He's abandoned. He's got no people. He's got no provisions. He's lost. Everything is done. His life is turned upside down. That was not the way it was supposed to go for Moses. His life has been turned upside down. So he just happens to meet and get married to a woman whose father is a priest. And God would later have him establish an order of priests to minister to his people. He just happened to be shepherding his father-in-law's sheep, and God would later call him to shepherd his people. You ever wondered why Moses wasn't shepherding his own sheep? Why didn't God bless him? He was a Hebrew. He was an Israelite. He was a person of promise. Why wouldn't God allow him to have his own sheep and his own herd and his own riches? Because if he would have, Moses wouldn't have turned aside. Are you with me? What he had wasn't his own. It wasn't personal. But if it had become personal, Moses wouldn't have turned aside. Angela and I have talked about many things that have happened in our lives, and we wonder why. Why this person and this family and this couple and all this, and why does this happen for them, and they get to do this and they get to have this? Can I here to tell you, if we would have gotten all that, if everything would have come together for us, we would have never left everything in Florida that meant something to us, and all the people that mattered to us. If we would have had all this stuff and all these attachments, we wouldn't have turned and obeyed the voice of God to go to the Midwest. And I'm going to do something with your life. I'm going to use you in the Midwest. We would have never done. No way. I'm not. Especially Angel. She lived in the Midwest. No. I want to be in Florida. I left the Midwest to go to Florida. I'm not going back. There's a reason why God does stuff. There's a reason why God doesn't allow us to have things. There's a reason why God doesn't bless us with things sometimes. I'm a child of God. I'm a royal priesthood. I'm a servant of the one true God. Everything He has is yes and amen, and it's mine, and I can name it and claim it. No, not contrary to the will of God. We need to learn to put our life in perspective and consider the plan and the will of God for our lives.
Amen. Woo. Come on, brother.
He just happened to be leading these sheep through the backside of a desert. The same desert that he would have to lead God's people through to get to the promised land. He just happened to be learning the terrain. He just happened to be leading the sheep to Mount Horeb, the same mountain God would later have him lead his people to. All these things just happened. These things just happened to be fallen in place for Moses. No, they were a divine setup. God specifically ordering the steps of a righteous man. God specifically causing things to happen in Moses' life. I guarantee you, to that day, had no significance for Moses. I guarantee you, up until that day, Moses didn't understand, oh, I'm herding sheep because one day I'm going to be the deliverer of Israel. Oh, I'm marrying a priest's daughter so I can understand priesthood because one day God is going to have me establish a royal priesthood, an order of priests that will be divinely selected and to minister to God's people. I guarantee you Moses had no idea, but God knew. God set everything in order from the time Moses was born. From the time He gave Moses breath, He divinely ordered things in Moses' life. And from the time you took your first breath, God has been divinely ordering things in your life that may have no significance to you now, or you may have not understood, but they are divine setup from a holy God.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus.
So prior to this, a lot went wrong for Moses. But suddenly, here he is, face to face with the God he'd only heard about. Everything up to that moment was a divine setup. We could go through the Bible and we could look at literally endless people, and we could see throughout Scripture, we could see this common thread, how God works this way in people's lives. But let's just look at a few. Let's look at David. David was just an overlooked kid. He didn't stand out for having any particular abilities. But it just so happened that he was a shepherd boy who was mastering the ability to lead and protect sheep. God would later call him to be the shepherd king and protector of his people Israel. David was given nicknames. If you've studied the life of David, remember we did our Bible study, we talked about different ways to study the Bible. Do a character study on David. And you will find out one of the things he was called was the shepherd king.